So when was Britain's first sex shop opened? The answer was in the 18th century.
First, the history of comedy with Katie Brand. Kind of. That got you nervous.
I know. I suddenly felt like I was at school.
We're asking if we're any ruder, saucier, smuttier today than we were in days gone by, because it's easy to assume the answer is yes. We have page 3 girls, pervy comics and topless fire eaters on family shows. It wasn't like that in the 1950s, that is for sure, when double entendres were the name of the game. Things got racier in the 60s. Barbara Windsor's bra came off in Carry On Camping, and frankly, well, everything came off in the first West End production of Hair. Now, back through history, Chaucer's wife of Bath. You're told everything you need to know about her front bottoms. Shakespeare gave us cross-dressing characters and sexual innuendo. Things got heaps more graphic in the 18th century, and I mean graphic. I fight in your general direction. Now, the reign of Queen Victoria saw us clean up our act as a wave of prudishness swept the nation. She even had a statue of the naked David modified, a fig leaf added to cover his little winky woo. And yet, of course, behind closed doors, there was a roaring trade in what passed for pornography in those days. So, Katie, history of comedy. Has Britain become a much bawdier, filthy place than it used to be?
No, I don't think it has. I think every generation thinks that the country's going to the dogs and that we're all rude. But I do think perhaps what this question speaks to is the idea that all of those examples that were mentioned there, and things like the wife of Bath and Gilray and all of that, it has a sort of, I suppose, a satirical intent.
Yes.
It has some sort of hope that this will be a cultural comment rather than just sex or rudeness for its own sake. So if you sort of take, you know, there's nothing more necessarily graphic now. It's just that I don't know when Kinga, you know, helped herself out with a bottle in Big Brother. I don't know if she was necessarily trying to make some satirical comment about modern society, or whether she was just trying to get a noonie on TV. I don't know, but you know, it's sort of. But I don't think it's necessarily ruder. I just think that there's not that layering of a sort of cultural aspiration on top of it, which maybe...
It's just rudeness for rudeness' sake.
It's
Hair,
it's
the musical,
so
was nudity, but you know, it was about the flower power generation, it was about revolution and change.
It was using nudity or using rudeness or using sexual things to make a wider point, rather than just, if I do this, I'll become famous and I'll get on telly and I'll make money.
Okay.
And that, to me, is a completely different thing, because I am as rude and bawdy as like anyone who knows me when I'm allowed to, you know, will know. You know, well, a friend of mine once called me a notorious filth bucket, so I don't, you know. But I just think it has to be trying to say something else as well.
Okay, Huey.
Well, in my experience in England, I remember when my band first started touring here in the mid-90s, you'd go into a hotel room and you'd put on the adult pay station, and they didn't show anything.
No.
Everything was kind of like angled off.
Yeah.
But now I guess with the advent of the internet, things are a little bit more graphic.
That's a good point.
In the United States, I think it's a little bit more prudish than it is in Europe. I think the human form, obviously, is a little bit more accepted in Europe. And I think that rudeness is maybe not be the right term. I think more freedom of expression is probably...
So we're a freer nation.
I think a freer nation in your expression of sex and love, or whatever you want to call it.
OK, Larry, that's a really interesting point, Larry.
I think we've always been saucy. I mean, all those Carry-On films that we're all brought up with and everything, just in recent times. But it tends to have been concentrated, you know, in music hall and kind of sort of, nice middle-class people were not rude. I mean, my mother has never sworn. She said blast when things have got really, really dark. That is it, because she just. And my father once walked into a room and said a swear word, and I was so shocked. And he said, "Well, everybody else is saying them, so I thought I ought to try." That's how they were, and that's how I was brought up. So I'm quite offended by bad language because I'm not used to it. And if I hear it in the street, I find it ugly, and I don't want to hear it, and I don't want to hear it on television. Okay. And I'm easily offended by blue jokes because, again, I wasn't brought up. There's a lot of misogyny in a lot of those jokes. So I don't
That is true. That is true as well.
There was a lot more one-way jokes, like Benny Hill with it was always the women that were the objectified ones.
That's very true. Eric, what about our audience? What do they say here?
We've got Emma. So,
Morning, Emma.
Do you think, is Britain ruder?
Well, I think up to a certain point. I think it's so changed. Like, you don't go down the back alleys and you sort of see whole houses or anything. But then you walk down, the high street, but you see like Ann Summers.
Yeah.
And they're quite open about sort of lingerie and...
Do you think that's a good thing, though? That I mean, I mean, you get sex shops in America, but there is that sort of sense of prudishness there about television showing sex that we don't have here. So is it a good thing that we're a little bit more open about it?
Yeah, I guess. I guess also if you go in, they sort of have sort of the downstairs room, if you know what I mean.
I don't, actually. I'm a Catholic.
Please tell us.
But what I am interested in is you go to places like France and Germany, and their nudity seems to be just taken as
hang on a second.
nudity.
It's not
you know?
male nudity, it's female nudity.
Female
It's
nudity.
wall-to-wall breasts in France, and that it really irritates
Is that
me.
right?
Yes.
Gosh.
Well, I mean,
Nobody told me that.
There was a film that Patrick C. Riley was in, and it was a comedy about a rock singer. It was a parody on the Johnny Cash movie, and there was a male full frontal nudity shot, and it was meant to be funny. And a lot of people, I remember watching this film and laughing at it and thinking it was funny. A lot of people were like, yo, that's completely wrong. You can't show a man's thing, but it's all right to show a woman's
So
thing.
that misogyny.
Yeah, so that it's you can't objectify a man's genitalia, but you can to a woman. And I think
it's because they're not as pretty. He said subjective. Just a subjective observation.
maybe
Thank you. Oh, shut up. We're going to take a break. Save my blushes.